our topic today is about dreams, and so dream is like very interesting, and like I'm very interested in like how to interpret it, and I believe like a lot of people are too. But there are like different type of dreams that, as we know, like sometimes I dream about like really like contextual stuff that I want to interpret and read into. Sometimes they're very absurd, very different from real life, and sometimes I just like fall and then wake up. And I know like Tad, you're like very expert in the field of like interpreting like narrations and stuff. So I want to get some insight from you on like how can we interpret our dreams if we're like, for example, like on our own and we just have a dream and we want to know what is behind that.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think I want to represent myself as any kind of expert on dream interpretation. I think I do know a thing or two, and I started this journey decades ago, so I have some experience. When I did my graduate training in clinical psychology, that is in the mid-70s to the late 70s, I was exposed to, back then, what was like sort of the more popular approach to dreams that was obviously mainly characterized by Sigmund Freud's work and subsequent generations of psychoanalysts. A lot of controversies followed, and actually, like as soon as we started, like in the 70s, there were already people who were questioning, like, are we over-interpreting? Like, does it make sense for us to be like reading all these really, I would say, very rich and sometimes very complicated ideas into the dreams people have reported, and obviously the controversy has continued. I would say now, like in the business of dreams, you can think of like two poles. You have like people who believe that dreams are just like routine neurophysiological events, during what is now called REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, for the brain to sort of like try to integrate, reconfigure, and manage the channeling and storage of information. Many of them would be, lived experience from everyday life, emotional experience, and some of those would be cognitive content that got stored away somewhere in the brain. And the dreaming is part of this, like sort of like selection, integration, rechanneling, reconfiguring process. I'm obviously oversimplifying this. Like people who are interested, there are actually quite a few good books written, some best-selling books included, that can give you sort of an overview of the current neurosciences. And for people who do not mind spending some time, you can actually just go online, get into any like OpenAI, ChatGPT, generative AI, you'll find tons of material there. So this is like, on the one hand, you have people who believe that, and they do not assign too much significance to what you remember from your dreams, all the way to people who believe that dreams carry some important, significant personal messages, even to like further extreme, some people are saying that like dreams are actually your window into the beyond, like a transcendental, spiritual, or even supernatural realm. I would say I'm probably somewhere in between, right? Am I an expert on that? I don't know. But I really want to like say this right from the get-go, that like even Freud himself, he actually has written about it, and he has complained about this misunderstanding in his new introductory lectures to psychoanalysis, that many people misunderstood where he stood in terms of dreams. One of the popular misunderstanding, which Freud pointed out, unfortunately, like over 100 years later, that misunderstanding is still pretty prevalent. So a lot of people think that, okay, you go to a Freudian or psychoanalytic therapist or dream interpreter, you will get like sexualized interpretation. So everything in your dreams have something to do with sex. And Freud very explicitly emphasized that simply is not true. Right? So I just want to start with my introduction there. So what are some of the key positions that I think were important for people who were attracted by the idea? Right? Later on, we can talk about scientific validity and all that. But I think the first thing that we have to deal with is like, do we believe that the human mind processes information at multiple levels? So we have what Freud would call the conscious level, things that we are fully aware of. Like, so if I'm asking you to work out the sum of like 2 + 2 + 4, that is a conscious process, right? But then like our mind also processes information in a way that is not fully conscious. So there are like 2 layers at least that would make sense conceptually. One is what we call the subconscious. The subconscious is something that you're normally not aware of, but you will have little problem gaining awareness of them if I point it out to you. Say, for example, we are now doing this video, right? And we're recording in a natural home environment, not in a studio. So if you pay close attention, you can hear the humming of the air conditioning, right? So something just like, there's a signal from a beep on my laptop, right? So these are things that you will be able to pay attention to and become aware of. So if you're now watching this video and I ask you, okay, please pay attention to this like very mild sensation of warmth right at the center of your soul, right, beneath your foot, then you'll be able to sense that. If I want you to pay attention, say, to the taste in your mouth now, you'll be able to sense that. So all of these do not necessarily enter into your consciousness, but you can easily access. So this is what we call the subconscious, or some people call preconscious. And it is not to be confused with the idea of the unconscious. The unconscious in the Freudian sense, and I want to make it very clear, because there are people who have done research on unconscious information processing. The unconscious, especially in the psychodynamic sense, or like in the way that Freud initially intended, has to be distinguished between what we can call the cognitive unconscious, because like there is cognitive science evidence now that like we do process information beneath our awareness, right? It can be like, you can be like working out some people, say for example, I remember in the history of science, the discovery of the benzene ring was allegedly the result of a dream. So what we have to pay attention to is like there are 2 types of unconscious. One is like the information that are processed without like direct intervention or engagement with our conscious mind. The other, in the psychodynamic sense, is like material that we have censored. And that censorship is motivated. So if we understand this like broad idea of like the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious, then what I will have to say is that like when I was being trained as a clinical psychologist in the 70s, people believe that they either have to believe in the psychodynamic version of the unconscious or the cognitive version. And now I've found that actually both processes are present. So meaning
it's integration.
Yeah. So like in our dreams, I think it is sometimes understandable, to me at least, right, that we're just like processing a huge amount of information and trying to reconfigure so that our brain can store them in a better way. We can also get our experience of life and reality to be better integrated. like more coherent and all that. So I follow that line of thinking, and I believe this is what the brain does during sleep and dreaming. But I have also been like looking at a lot of dreams, and I have to say that the connection between some of these dream content and what is happening in the person's psychological life or emotional life is so compelling that it becomes very difficult for you to say that, oh no, these are just like random manifestations, like random like images, random experiences and fragments of like what you recollect. But like these two positions, in my opinion, is not incompatible. Like the both processes happen. So how do we know which is which, right? I would have to say this up front. I don't think we can ever be 100% sure. There is always an element of like speculation, an element of like uncertainty in this. So this is why my approach to interpretation of dreams is sort of like, in a way, more literary than scientific. I do not claim that like whatever I'm reading is necessarily true or scientifically valid. What I'm looking for is like, does it make sense to you? Is it relevant to you? Is it helpful to you? So, and in some cases, I would just ask, like, is it of interest to you? Like, you know, so that is like sort of my main approach to this. The other thing that I also need to say, as someone who has been practicing psychotherapy for decades, is that some people have found dream interpretation to be ultra valuable in psychotherapy. I just have to say that, yes, they can actually be ultra valuable depending on the system or the school of psychotherapy that you're practicing. But I have to just say it like upfront, a lot, I would say actually the majority of successful psychotherapy actually have happened without ever engaging in interpreting dreams. So I think I want to put it in the right position. We do not want to make excessive claims over it, but we also do not want to completely discard it as something that is clinically irrelevant. But I think putting it in the right place is important. I think dreams are relevant and useful and important as far as both the dreamer and the person that the dreamer is working with, like, believe that there is something about it. There is like some meaning, there is some relevance of that to whatever they're working on. So I think that is my sort of more conservative position, right? But I have to say that, like, I have been and still probably will be fascinated by dreams, dream narratives, and the dreaming process. And I think it is in this spirit that I want to share my observations with people. And if you find it helpful, fantastic. If not, then I'm okay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and perspectives on dreams. Today, like, I just have like two main questions. So firstly, like, what are dreams for? And then the other question I have that I want to look into with you is how do we read into it? Because you mentioned that in psychotherapy of your experience, you interpreted the dreams of your clients, and sometimes they're very helpful. But as like a person who received those information and read into it as like a second-hand receiver of this information, how do you work with your clients and let them understand the meaning of the dream? But let's start with the first one. What are dreams for?
Okay, all right. I'll answer that one, but I just want to make a quick footnote here.
Yeah.
Because, well, everyone dreams, right?
Yes.
So you're right. Like, my interpretation of other people's dreams like forms a good part of my interest and experience in dream interpretation. But I'm also a dreamer myself.
Yes,
And I have recorded and analyzed many of my own dreams. So that is very different. So later on, I hope I can like share some experience about my own dreams. And I have to say this publicly. Freud and actually Carl Jung have both like shared personal dreams of theirs, right, and in a public manner. And I think those are valuable because these are records of what they remembered, and they're still like accessible. And for people who are curious, you can still go back and ask yourself, like, does it make sense to interpret them, right? What are these telling us, right? So we are asking actually two questions here. One, what is the nature of dreaming? Like what is it? So I already said, like, some people believe that it is part of our neurophysiological process with the function of helping our brain to deal with massive input and information. So why do we dream frequently? Some people argue that we actually dream every time we go to sleep, or like at least most times when we go to sleep. And even many people remember, even when you're taking a nap in the afternoon, you might be dreaming too. So the dreaming process is an information processing sequence in your brain in which, like, there are a few things. One, there is like selection and screening. So what are some of the things that the dream should like process, or some of the information would just be sort of like screened out because the brain has limited capacity. So we want to select information that are relevant for our survival, for our wellness, to be processed. So I think there's a huge amount of information that got screened out, and then we do not even remember them. So that is the kind of selection based on efficiency, right, and capacity. But then there is another process of information management that happens during dreaming. And this is what intrigues me, right? So first of all, I believe that, like, this is what we do. Like, we go through a lot of sensory, cognitive, and emotional experience on a daily basis. And there's a huge volume of data that the brain needs to deal with. So during rapid eye movement sleep, this is one of those processes that we are selecting and integrating. And then, like, we're also helping the brain to reconfigure so certain information get channeled along. We continue this process in our non-REM sleep, right? With like when in deeper levels of sleep, like in 4 stages, like sleep research scientists have told us. But during that period, while we're not dreaming, the entire body is sort of like in a more relaxed state. The brain is still very actively managing this information, reprocessing them, restoring them, or cataloging them, right? So if you think of the brain as a huge computer system, right? This is like what dreaming does, right? So basically it's a reconfiguration, like filing things away and compressing or reprocessing some of these information into different chunks that are packaged differently for different pieces of information. So this is like why we have like people like yourself saying there's like, sometimes the dreams would appear to you as something with a narrative structure. It's almost like a story with sequence, with the plot, characters, like settings and all that. And sometimes like the dream is just like some random sensory event, right? And one of the things is like, it's very common to people is that like you're in the middle of the night and then suddenly you woke up, have the sensation that you're like falling, like or like losing your balance. So this is like, I think it's called the hypnic jerk. So it's all ranged from like a simple sensation to like a more elaborate story. So, and then some people actually have dreams that are repeated that are the same.
Yeah.
Some people have dreams that actually carry on, and then they're like plot development in those dreams.
So they have like different dreams, but it carries on the previous one. That's interesting.
So the one dimension that we can put in here is like the extent to which the dream is narrativized. So you have like dreaming sensations that are not narrativized. It doesn't form a coherent narrative, and then you have like very elaborate dreams, like that can actually fit into like a grand narrative. So dreaming has been studied by neuroscientists, and then they perform like I would say self-preservatory functions. And most of the people who do neuroscience research on dreams, they usually subscribe to what we call the evolutionary perspective, meaning that we believe all these functions must have served humankind evolutionary functions, so that like we're keeping these like after like hundreds of thousands of years. So that is a position that I personally subscribe to. Right? What is like the point of departure is like whether we believe dream contents carry additional meaning, right? Other than like random flashes of like images and sensations that we just happen to remember out of this like huge information processing exercise. So I think that is the key thing. So in my personal view, I think dreams very often, not always, right, can tell us something important about our lives. The reason why I say very often and not always is because I do believe that we can have like fragments of like sensations, or fragments of images, fragments of whatever bodily experience or sensory experience that may or may not have clear, definite meaning, and I think that is possible because the selection process involves two parts. One is what is retained, one is what is discarded, right? So I think what is retained is only a small percentage compared to what is discarded. So, and then I think there is like a nebulous boundary between the two, and then it's totally possible that there is like fragments of certain things that the brain has decided to discard, that you still have traces of, right? And then the complication starts here, because like up to this point I'm talking mainly about sort of like an instrumental understanding of the dreaming process. I haven't taken in the Freudian contribution yet, because what Freud would point out is that, well, you think something is being discarded, where they're actually not. They're actually stored in your unconscious. It's only that access to it has been blocked. Right, these are censored material, not discarded material. So like discarded material is like if you use like a real life library as an analogy, right? The discarded will be the things that have been shredded or burned, right?
Yeah.
But the censored, where it's like stored somewhere in like the special collection of your library, or like like increased security access. You need certain key or password or like some authorization to get into that part of the library where things are stored. So I think some of the fragments that we remember can be, like somewhere in between, and I'm not sure that the boundary is all that clear.
So it can be discarded materials and can be censored as well. Okay. So we can get into the second part, which I'm very interested in, is how to interpret the narration of dreams. Okay, so I'm glad that you're using the word narration, right? Because this is the key, right? So this is why I made this prefatory comment earlier on about myself being a dream reader as well as a dreamer, yes.
Right? So the narration, right, is like the process of when you turn your dreamed experience into a narrative. Yes. But as we know, narratives, like especially when it's produced in terms of like spoken or written word, are very often quite ineffective in conveying some of the key elements of dreams. So let me give you a very recent example of a dream that I had. Some people would find it very disturbing. I didn't, because I'm used to experience like that. So in this dream, like I'm not going to give you the full context, I'm just using some elements of dream. So in this dream, I saw bugs that were not natural, meaning that you probably do not see real like living organisms like that. They look like insects, but they have like too many legs and too many extensions. I didn't even know in the dream whether they are tentacles or just like extensions from the bug's body, or they legs. And they have hooks, like like fishing hooks. And they came in different illumination and color. So the most prominent image that I still have were like they come in like a light blue translucent form. But then there are also bugs in the same dream that were sort of brownish, opaque, less translucent. So these are, so I'm describing it to the best I can. But as the dreamer, I understand that whatever I'm producing or narrativizing now, some details are lost. Right? And then there is this tactile sense, because in the dream I actually like grab this bugs, right? So I have this like tactile sense, and then there are also extensions or these tentacles like cutting through my skin, right? And then the sensation was not sharp, the sensation was blurred. So like if you ask me like, did you experience pain in the dream? The answer is like probably not. Right? If I zoom in and then I look at, so I have like some subdermal cut, right? But there was no blood. So I can go on and on. I just want to give you an idea. A lot of details in the dream, like sensory details of the dream, would be lost in most dream narratives. If you're questioning me on this, so Tab, when you're dreaming this, are you feeling warm or cold? Right? I would be able to answer that question, right? But generally, when someone is talking about the dream, they probably would not tell you
they would
that,
skip
right?
the
Right?
details.
So like there's a lot of sensory information that are lost. And if you look at dream narratives, you will find that, like if you read dreams, you'll find that there are certain modalities that are privileged. The visual is obviously privileged. If people remember what is being talked about in dreams, right, that is also privileged. And out of the auditory, and I would say the spoken word is usually given like sort of like more attention than other sound or noise, like wind blow or the like humming sound of the air conditioning. So certain aspects are being amplified or focused on, and some of these would be faded in the background. And when all these are being translated into a narrative, many of these elements would be lost. So visual and auditory are the privileged modalities. Every now and then, you have people talking about tactile experience. You have people talking about what we call kinesthetic experience, like meaning sensations that are generated by your own body. Sometimes we have taste. Sometimes we have smell or the olfactory. So all of these, as you know, are unevenly distributed. And so when we look at any dream narrative, we have to understand that each narrative is incomplete. And they can, in theory, never be complete. Because like even if you go through a long interview with a person, not trying to help him or her to remember what happened in the dream, there would be something lost. And then the other thing is that because the fact that we're carrying on the conversation itself, right, is a social constructive process shaping the narrative. So when someone is coming up with an answer, that is not necessarily going back to the original experience. the person is responding to a questioning process, and so certain things get like emphasized, certain things like got left out, and there is selective focusing on different aspects of the dream. And the other thing is, because you have to translate it into language, language is usually more discrete, but your sensory experience can be more fuzzy. So if someone asks you, okay, so is it colored or not, you actually do not remember. And when you try to remember, right, then you're imposing this structure of color into your recollection process. So the narrative itself actually helps to generate, like the conversation helps to generate the narrative. So this is why we understand dream narrative to be one, incomplete, two, if it is not volunteered, but it is like a result of a conversation or an exploration, then we need to recognize that the final narrative or the whole narrative process is socially co-constructed. And that is why when we try to interpret it, we have to bear this in mind.
So I want to ask you a question. So like when you're doing dream work with your client, do you tend to avoid like very discrete like questions when you're like framing the question? For example, like you ask, is there color experienced in your dreams, like for a specific scene?
So there are like different phases in my career. Okay. Yeah. So when I was a novice, like initially trained, right? So I was trained obviously under heavy influence of psychoanalytic articulations. So I would try to explore themes, right, that are like sort of more familiar to a psychodynamic or psychoanalytically oriented therapist. But soon enough, right, I think within the first year or two of my practice, I came under strong influence of Continental phenomenology, which led me to privilege a more open and unstructured space for my clients to be producing their own narratives. Meaning I try to refrain from asking direct questions or directive questions, right? Avoid direct questions and directive questions. So I will give them hopefully maximum narrative space to tell their story. So I would use prompts such as, okay, tell me more about that. But that even like, it sounds like an innocent question, but it actually is selective focusing. Like, why do you ask your client to tell you more about this instead of that, right? So, but I tried, there were a set of rules that I followed back in those days, right? One is like, do not introduce what I call extraneous constructs. So if there's a construct or concept that the client has not referred to, I would not introduce it, right? Right? So you would not ask, like, is someone feeling very angry? Well, then the construct of anger, right, is being introduced. So what are people doing to cope with this challenge? Then coping with challenge is a construct that you introduce into this narrative or this conversation. So there is a period when I use sort of like a more phenomenological approach, which requires, right, like one, you know, like don't ask direct questions, you do not introduce extraneous constructs, you try to maximize narrative space for your client. You also try to refrain from activating some of your favorite themes. So that is a process called phenomenological suspension, or like bracketing out, meaning you say, for example, you believe that family of origin experience are important. When you're trying to understand the person's dream, and then the person mentions something about parents, you deliberately try to refrain from making that assumption and let the person just like continue telling the story. So those are some of the rules that I try to follow during that period. But then later on, I found that being presuppositionless, which is an ideal in phenomenological inquiry, is not really practicable. So you almost inevitably bring in something, even though simple things like structures that people usually do not pay attention to, like timing, like space, so soon enough I realized that there is no such thing as a pure open space for the client to produce his or her narrative. I would say that the first unprompted segment of the dream narrative is particularly valuable to me. That is if someone tells me something, okay, Tat, I want to tell you this dream, right? And then the person started. So right to the moment that I had to say something, that is what I call the volunteered original segment. As soon as I said something, okay, that sounds interesting, tell me more about this. Or you mentioned this person in your dream, right? So can you tell me who this person is? Once I get into that, I'm shaping the narrative. So in my analysis, I try to differentiate between the part that is volunteered and the conversation that was sort of so there was prompts and framing and questions and structures that I obviously would have brought in. I have actually utilized the same thinking in my research. So I have devised a semi-structured interview procedure for doing research, following more or less the same reasoning. First of all, we would allow the person to freely narrativize. And then when the person has run out of things to say, then we started our own inquiring questions and or asking for elaboration and all that. But any of these, there's no way that we can escape putting in some of our own views and structures and how reality is constructed. Actually, we cannot escape because just by choosing the language we use. Now we're doing this interview in English. As you know, we could have done this in at least 2 other languages or dialects, right, between you and me. But we've chosen to do this in English, and the English language in itself, the syntax, the way that the language is structured, the lexicon, would allow certain things to be better communicated, and there are also ideas and experience that probably would be easier in another language. So the language itself actually shapes the kind of narrative that we would eventually get. So it will become increasingly academic. We're getting to that direction. But coming back to your question, right? So analyzing or reading any dream starts with a recognition of what dream narratives are. So there are 2 types, right, of content. One is this is what I'm saying to my colleagues in mental health and in psychotherapy. I said, well, if you're working clinically, you have actually never analyzed any dream. You have only analyzed dream narratives. The only dreams that you can actually analyze are your own, because you are the dreamer, right? You can analyze your dreams because you have access to things that are not narrativized, right? So you can actually do that, right? But dream interpretation, right, in clinical practice or in professional practice, would be actually more accurately called the analysis of dream narratives. The dreams that you can analyze are your own.